I did not flinch. I did not look away. I let the silence stretch for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for my brother's smirk to flicker with the first micro doubt, and then I allowed my gaze to drop to the chipped edge of the long wooden table. The frost on the barn windows was thick enough to frost the amber light into hazy bands, and I counted the cracks in the varnish while I waited for the heat behind my sternum to dissipate. You can't even afford a bus ticket. Cole said it with his chin lifted, his voice carrying that practiced, lazy condescension he'd perfected over 33 years. He leaned back in his chair, the old oak groaning under his weight, and folded his arms across the puffy down vest that probably cost more than the truck I'd driven here. I watched the slight, desperate twitch in his left jaw muscle, the tell he'd never learned to control, the one that appeared whenever his confidence was a millimeter thinner than he pretended. I am Alina Vance. 33 years old. Certified public accountant, forensic auditor. Over the past 6 years, I had recovered $1,700,000 in misappropriated funds for 3 separate clients, a regional hospital, a small manufacturing firm, and a synagogue endowment, without a single civil suit filed against me. I had also, in the past decade, silently managed the books of this family farm, paying off 2 separate tax liens totaling $43,000 and a delinquent equipment loan for $12,000 more. I had done it without a single thank you, without a single acknowledgement, because my grandfather asked me to, because I believed that quiet competence would eventually be recognized. I had been wrong. Bus ticket, I said. The words came out flat, clinical. Is that what you think I'm down to? Simone, my sister-in-law, smiled with her lips pressed together, her perfectly glossed mouth curving into a mask of sympathy. We're just looking out for the family's future, Alina. Nobody wants you to struggle. She laid her manicured hand on Cole's forearm, the diamond on her ring catching the low light. The gesture was rehearsed. I had seen it 100 times. Beside her, our cousin Derek shifted in his chair and cleared his throat. Grandpa wanted us all to share, Alina. You know that. He wouldn't have wanted you to sell off the back 40 without talking to us first. I said nothing. I let my hand rest on the table, palm flat, and I felt the cool grain of the wood beneath my fingers. The mustard scarf my grandfather had given me for my 21st birthday, a rich, warm wool cashmere blend with a faint herringbone weave, hung loose around my neck, and I touched the edge of it as if grounding myself. The scarf was the only thing I owned that had ever made me feel anchored, and I wore it whenever I knew I would face them. It was my armor. I looked at the 3 of them: Cole, the architect, always orchestrating, always performing; Simone, the enforcer, who smiled while she twisted the knife; Derek, the beneficiary, who had never worked an acre of this land but who showed up whenever there was money to claim. They had gathered me in this barn, at this long table, under the amber glow of the old carriage lamps, to confront me about the sale. They thought they had caught me in a betrayal. They thought they had cornered me, but they had no idea what I already knew. I let my breath out slowly, quietly, and I said a single sentence to myself, a promise that would carry me through the next 90 minutes. I already knew how this would end. And then I pulled out my phone and placed it face up on the table, screen dark, and said nothing more. If you are listening from somewhere right now, maybe a car, maybe a kitchen, maybe a quiet room where you are trying to hold yourself together, tell me what city you are in. I want to know that I am not the only one who has sat across from people who thought they had the power. Because what I learned that evening in the barn is something I wish someone had told me 10 years ago. Silence is not weakness. It is a ledger you keep on the inside, and when you have recorded every single debt, you will know exactly when to call it due. If this story speaks to something you have lived, I ask you to take a moment and hit the like button, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. Because the next time someone tells you that you cannot even afford a bus ticket, I want you to remember: sometimes the person who owns nothing holds the deed to everything. Now, let me take you back to how this nightmare started. It began 7 years ago, on a frozen afternoon in early March, when my grandfather called me into the farmhouse study and asked me to take over the books. He was 78 then, his hands knotted with arthritis, his voice thin but sharp as a blade. He trusted me, he said. He knew I would never let the farm be swallowed by debt or by people who saw it only as a check to be cashed. I was 26 years old, fresh out of my 3rd year as a staff accountant at a mid-size firm in Albany, and I had just begun to earn my reputation as someone who found what others missed. I said yes without hesitation. I thought it was an honor. For the next 5 years, I drove out to the farm every other weekend, sometimes more, to review the ledgers, reconcile the accounts, and untangle the mess that my uncle had left behind when he had mismanaged the operation into near bankruptcy. I found the equipment loan that had somehow been hidden from the tax returns, with interest accruing at 16%. I found 2 property tax liens that had been filed by the county and quietly ignored. I paid them off out of my own savings, quietly, because my grandfather had no liquid cash and I could not bear to see the land sold at auction. I never told anyone. Not Cole, not Simone, not Derek. I told myself it was because I wanted to protect my grandfather's dignity. But looking back, I think I already knew, even then, that they would not thank me. They would not even notice. And that knowledge, the quiet certainty of being invisible, was a wound I had been nursing for years. The family dynamics were never subtle. Cole, 2 years older, had been the golden child since birth, the one who inherited our father's charisma and our mother's relentless ambition. He had been sent to private school, given a truck at 16, and handed the reins of the farm's daily operations when our father retired. He ran it into the ground, of course, but nobody said a word. Simone married him right out of college, a blonde from a neighboring county with a trust fund and a taste for designer labels, and she took over the role of family matriarch with alarming efficiency. Derek was the hanger-on, the cousin who showed up for every holiday and every inheritance conversation, never contributing anything but his opinion. When I walked into family gatherings, I wore sensible clothes, dark slacks, a cashmere sweater, my grandfather's mustard scarf. I drove a 5-year-old sedan that I kept immaculate, not because I could not afford better, but because I had no interest in displaying wealth I had earned through years of grinding. Meanwhile, Simone appeared in a new coat every season, some with fox fur collars, others with gold buttons, and Cole's boots were hand-tooled leather worth a full mortgage payment. They talked about investments and vacation homes. I talked about depreciation schedules and interest rate swaps. They did not listen. Over those 5 years, I learned to read their physical tells the way I read a balance sheet. Cole's left jaw twitch when he was bluffing. Simone's habit of touching her hair when she was lying. Derek's tendency to look down and to the right before he spoke a half-truth. I cataloged them all, silently, the way I cataloged every irregularity in a financial statement. I did not know I was building a case file. I only knew I was tired. Then my grandfather died. It was a heart attack, sudden and silent, on a Thursday morning in early June. I was in my office in Albany when my phone rang, and I drove the 2 hours to the farm in a state of mechanical calm, stopping only once to buy gas and a bottle of water. I did not cry until I saw his empty chair in the study, his reading glasses still on the desk, the ledger open to the page where he had been tracking the farm's expenses in his careful, looping hand. The funeral was a blur. Cole gave a eulogy that mentioned the farm's legacy, but not the work it took to keep it standing. Simone organized the reception with military precision. Derek circulated among relatives, collecting condolences like currency. I stood near the back of the room, my mustard scarf wrapped tight around my neck, and I listened to people say how much Grandpa would be missed, how he had loved the land. Not one of them mentioned the 2 tax liens. Not one of them knew about the equipment loan. But I knew. And I also knew something else, something I had kept sealed in a folder in my office for the past 3 years, because Grandpa had asked me to. On June 14, 2019, exactly 14 months before his death, I had driven to the county recorder's office with a single document. It was a recorded trust deed, transferring ownership of the back 40, the swampy, wooded parcel that everyone in the family considered worthless, to me, Alina Vance, as sole beneficiary. Grandpa had signed it in my presence, his hand shaking, his eyes steady. "This land is for you," he had said. "Do not let them take what is yours. Use the truth, not anger." I had filed it without telling anyone. I had paid the recording fee out of pocket, $138, and I had placed the certified copy in a safety deposit box. For 3 years, I had kept the secret, waiting for the moment I would need it. That moment arrived on a cold November evening, a full year after the funeral, when I received a letter in the mail slot of the farmhouse mudroom. I had come back to the farm to clear out my grandfather's study, a task I had postponed for months because I could not bear to touch his things. The house was dark, empty, the power turned off except for the room I was working in by flashlight. I was sorting through a box of receipts when I heard the thud of mail falling through the slot in the mudroom door. I walked over, bent down, and picked up a single manila envelope, no return address, postmarked from the county seat. I opened it standing in the dim light of my phone's flashlight. Inside was a copy of a promissory note, dated March 12th of that year, issued by First Hudson Valley Bank. The borrower was listed as Cole Vance. The amount was $2,300,000. The collateral was the back 40, the same parcel that was now legally mine, by trust deed, recorded and irrevocable. I read the document 3 times, slowly, clinically. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me, the same clarity I felt when I found a fraud that had been hidden for years. The note was signed with my grandfather's name, but the signature was wrong. The notary stamp was from a company I had never heard of. The date was after his death. Cole had taken out a loan against land he did not own, using a forged power of attorney, a full year after Grandpa was gone. He had likely never expected anyone to find out until the bank came calling, and by then, he would have spent the money and blamed the estate. I folded the letter, slipped it into my coat pocket, and stood in the dark mudroom for a long time, listening to the wind rattle the windows. I thought about my grandfather's words, use the truth, not anger. I had the truth. I had the trust deed. I had the forged loan. And I had a plan that I had been building for years without even knowing it, one silent transaction at a time. I walked back to the study, sat down at the desk, and began to open the documentation trail. I made copies. I timestamped everything. I wrote a list of every debt, every payment, every drop of silent labor I had poured into this farm. And when I was done, I locked the folder in my safe. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted, my ally, Lydia Chen. She was a paralegal at a probate firm in Albany, and she had access to the county recorder's archives. I asked her to pull the original trust deed and the purchase agreement for the sale I had already negotiated, a sale of the mineral rights to the back 40 to TerraCore Energy LLC for the price of $2,300,000, a binding contract executed and notarized. She asked no questions. She simply said, "When do you need it?" "Tomorrow," I said. And then I called the man who would deliver the final blow. Jonathan Hart, a forensic accountant I had worked with on a previous case. He was the executor of a sealed agreement my grandfather had filed with the county recorder 1 week before he died, a document that transferred the back 40 to me in trust and named Jonathan as the independent auditor of the estate. I asked him to bring the trust documents, the certified check, and a court order freezing all family joint accounts pending an audit. He arrived at the barn exactly 2 hours after Cole spoke his bus ticket line. And when he handed me the envelope, I knew exactly how this would end. But that part of the story, the moment the check slid across the table and the color drained from Cole's face, that is for another telling. What I want you to understand, right now, is what I understood in that dark mudroom. I had been preparing for this confrontation since the day I filed the trust deed. And they had no idea that the weapon I held was not anger, but a single, flawless piece of paper. I opened my eyes to the amber glow of the carriage lamps, my phone still face down on the table, the silence in the barn exactly where I had left it. The cold had seeped through the gaps in the old planks, and I could feel the frost on the windows pressing inward, a thin white veil that blurred the bare branches of the maples outside. I had not blinked in a while. I had been counting the breaths of the 3 people across from me, each one a data point in a mental spreadsheet I had been updating for 7 years. Cole exhaled through his nose, a short, dismissive puff. Simone adjusted her watch, a gold Cartier, I noted, with a mother-of-pearl dial, and glanced at the door as if she expected applause to enter. Derek picked at a hangnail, his eyes flickering between me and the ceiling. They had rehearsed this. They had gathered here, in the barn where we had held every family meeting for 40 years, and they had prepared their lines. But they had not prepared for the possibility that I had no lines to give. "You know," Cole said, leaning forward now, his elbows on the table, "I tried to be diplomatic. I tried to give you a chance to explain yourself. But you just sit there, wrapped in that ugly scarf like you're above it all." He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "You can't even afford a bus ticket, Alina. And you think you can sell land out from under us." The words landed like a physical weight on my sternum. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I let the sensation pass through me, a cold electric current that traveled from my chest to my fingertips, and I observed it the way I observe a fraudulent entry on a ledger, dispassionately, noting its presence, filing it for later use. I counted to 4 in my head, then to 6, then to 8, and when I spoke, my voice was low and even. "Bus ticket." I repeated the phrase as if tasting it. Is that the best you have, Cole? You have had 6 years to come up with something more creative. Simone's lips pressed into a thin line. The diamond on her ring caught the light again, and I watched the micro-twitch at the corner of her left eye, the tell that always surfaced when she was about to lie. Elena, nobody wants to hurt you, but you have to understand how this looks. You sold Grandpa's land, the back 40, without telling any of us. You signed a contract with some energy company. I did not sell the land, I said. She stopped. Cole's jaw twitched. Derek stopped picking at his hangnail and looked up. I sold the mineral rights, I said, my voice still flat. There is a difference, and I did it because I own that parcel. I have owned it since June 14, 2019, filed with the county recorder's office, recorded and irrevocable. The silence that followed was not the dramatic hush of a movie. It was a thick, uncomfortable vacuum, the kind that settles over a room when a secret lands on the table like a concrete block. Cole's face went through a rapid sequence of micro-expressions: confusion, disbelief, panic, dismissal. He blinked twice quickly. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's not possible, he said. It is possible. It is legal. It is documented. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a photocopy of the recorded trust deed, the county seal visible at the bottom. I slid it across the table, face up, and watched him scan it. His eyes moved left to right, then paused, then moved again. I could see the moment he found the date, June 14, 2019, because his jaw twitched again, a small spasm that told me everything I needed to know. He had thought he had until the estate was settled. He had thought the land was still in probate limbo. This is forged, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. It is notarized, it is filed. You can call the county recorder's office yourself. The number is on the bottom. Simone reached over and took the document, her manicured fingers gripping the edges as if she could tear it. She read it, her face immobile, and then she set it down carefully, the way one sets down a live snake. This does not mean anything, she said, her voice tight. This was filed without our knowledge, without the family's consent. It is a trust deed, I said. Executed by the legal owner of the property in sound mind with witnesses. It is ironclad. And it means that when I entered into a purchase agreement with TerraCore Energy LLC for the mineral rights to that parcel, I did so as the sole legal owner. The sale price was $2,300,000, certified check, executed and notarized. Derek made a noise, a half-formed word that died in his throat. He was looking at the check I had not yet produced, but he was already calculating. I could see it in the way his eyes darted between Cole and Simone. He was a beneficiary by nature, and he was trying to figure out whose side would yield the biggest cut. Cole stood up. The chair scraped against the floorboards, a sharp sound that echoed off the rafters. You think you can just, he was spluttering, his confidence crumbling. His hands were trembling slightly, and he shoved them into the pockets of his down vest. You think you can walk in here with your accounting degree and your little scarf and take what is ours? This farm belongs to this family, Elena, not to you. Then perhaps the family should have paid the tax liens, I said, my voice soft. Perhaps the family should have paid off the equipment loan. Perhaps the family should have done any of the things I did for 7 years without being asked, without being thanked, without being acknowledged. Simone's face went still. Cole stopped mid-gesture. Derek looked at the floor. I let the silence stretch for another 3 seconds, and then I stood up. My chair did not scrape. I lifted it slightly, set it back down silently, the way I had learned to move through spaces without being noticed. I am not here to take anything, I said. I am here to give you a choice. I have a certified check for $2.3 million. I am prepared to distribute a portion of it to the family, after deductions for the debts I paid out of my own pocket and the lien your husband took out against the farm last year. I looked directly at Simone. You did not know about that, did you? Her face paled. She looked at Cole, who looked away. I picked up the photocopy, folded it, and placed it back in my coat pocket. You have until tomorrow at 8 in the morning to decide whether you want to accept a fair settlement or proceed with litigation. I have already retained Jonathan Hart, a forensic accountant, to audit the estate's assets. He will be delivering the relevant documents to me tonight. I turned and walked toward the barn door, my mustard scarf warm against my neck, my footsteps steady on the cold floor. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could hear Cole's voice, low and furious, as he began to argue with Simone, and I knew that the fracture had already begun. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a slap, and I breathed it in, deep and slow, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, the last light of the sunset bleeding into the horizon. The farmhouse stood dark and empty behind me, its windows reflecting the faint glow of the barn's lamps. I walked to my car, a 5-year-old sedan parked on the gravel drive, and I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, feeling the cold leather beneath my palms, and I allowed myself to feel the weight of what I had just done. I had drawn a line. I had set a boundary. I had spoken the truth that I had been holding for years, and they thought that was the ending. They thought I had delivered my ultimatum and would now wait, passive, for their answer. They did not understand that I had already moved the pieces. They did not understand that the $2.3 million was not a bribe or a settlement, it was a mirror. It was the exact value of the loan Cole had taken out against the back 40, forged and fraudulent. It was the exact amount he had stolen from the estate, the exact amount he had assumed he could take without consequence. And I had already called Lydia. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Elena," she said. No preamble, no small talk. That was Lydia, efficient, sharp, unflinching. "Go ahead," I said. "File the motion. Jonathan is ready. He has the trust documents, the certified check, and the court order. He will be at the barn in 40 minutes. Make it 30. Understood." I ended the call and started the engine, the sedan's heater slowly pushing warm air into the cabin. I sat there for another minute, watching the barn door, waiting for someone to come out. No one did. They were still inside, arguing, planning, trying to salvage the story they had told themselves about who I was. I pulled out of the driveway and drove down the long gravel road, past the frozen fields, past the skeletal trees, toward the county road that would take me back to the hotel I had booked for the night. I was not going home. I was not going anywhere they could find me. I was going to wait, in a quiet room with a locked door, until the trap closed. The car hummed beneath me, the tires crunching over gravel and ice, and I thought about my grandfather's words. Use the truth, not anger. I had used the truth, yes. But I had also used the law, and the law was a blade that did not require emotion to cut. I checked the clock on the dashboard, 7:17. The meeting had lasted 43 minutes. In 12 hours, everything would change. Back at the farmhouse, the barn door had swung shut, and the warmth of the lamps had begun to fade. Cole stood at the long table, his hands planted on the wood, his head bowed. Simone was pacing, her heels clicking against the floorboards. Derek had retreated to a corner, his phone in his hand, scrolling through his contacts as if looking for a lawyer. "She is bluffing," Cole said, but his voice was thin. "She has to be bluffing. There is no way she had a trust deed." "Grandpa would never do that." "He did," Simone said, her voice flat. "I saw the document, it is real. Then we fight it. We say she coerced him. We say he was not in his right mind. You want to go to court against a forensic accountant with a sealed trust deed?" Simone stopped pacing and looked at him. "You want to explain to a judge why you took out a loan against land that was not yours? Against land that you did not even know was not yours?" Cole's jaw twitched. He did not answer. Derek cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just take the settlement. $2.3 million minus whatever she says she paid. That is still." "We cannot take the settlement," Cole snapped. "Because I already spent the money." The silence that followed was longer, heavier, more final than any silence that had come before. Simone stopped. Derek put down his phone. They both stared at Cole, who had not raised his head. "How much?" Simone whispered. "The full amount," Cole said. $2.3 million. I took out the loan, used a notary I found online, forged Grandpa's signature. I thought I had time. I thought the estate would be tied up in probate for years. I thought I could flip it, pay it back, and nobody would ever know. Simone closed her eyes. She touched her hair, the micro gesture I had learned to read, but this time it was not a lie, it was exhaustion. "Then we are done," she said. "Not yet," Cole said, and there was something new in his voice, desperation, yes, but also a cold determination. "We still have one card left. She does not know about the loan. She only knows about the trust. If we can get her to agree to the settlement before she finds out, we can still." "She already knows," Derek said quietly. Both of them turned to him. "She mentioned the lien, Cole. She said the lien your husband took out against the farm last year. She knows. She has known the whole time." Cole sank into the chair. The air in the barn seemed to drain out, leaving only the cold and the dark and the sound of Simone's heels clicking as she walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Cole said. "To call a lawyer," Simone said. "We cannot win this, and I am not going down with you." She walked out into the night, leaving Cole alone at the table, the lantern light flickering, his reflection staring back at him from the dark glass of the window. He did not know it yet, but he had just celebrated the victory that would be his undoing. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the engine idling, the heater humming a low, steady note. The hotel parking lot was nearly empty, a sprawl of cracked asphalt and flickering streetlights that cast pale orange pools across the frozen ground. I had been sitting here for 11 minutes, the engine running, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my grandfather's scarf warm against my throat. I was not ready to go inside. I was not ready to be alone with the silence of a hotel room, where the only sounds would be the hum of the mini fridge and the whisper of the heating vent. Instead, I reached for my phone, pulled up the message thread with Lydia Chen, and typed 4 words: "He is on his way." She replied within 30 seconds, "I am already at the county recorder, pulling the original trust deed and the purchase agreement. Jonathan is en route to you with the sealed envelope. The court order is drafted and notarized, waiting for your go." I exhaled, a long, slow breath that fogged the windshield. Lydia had been my ally for 6 years, ever since I had helped her untangle a probate case at her firm, a case where an elderly client's daughter had forged a will and siphoned $300,000 from an estate. Lydia had felt the fraud in her gut, but she had lacked the documentation to prove it. I had found the paper trail in a single weekend, a series of bank statements that showed the daughter depositing checks made out to the estate into a personal account, each one just under the threshold for automatic reporting. After that case, Lydia had trusted me with her own secrets, and I had trusted her with mine. I opened a second thread, this one with Jonathan Hart. No messages yet. He was driving from his office in Albany, a 2-hour trip that he had promised to make in 90 minutes. I had worked with Jonathan on 3 separate audits, and I knew his precision was absolute. He did not miss details. He did not make mistakes. I put the phone in the cup holder, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The air bit at my cheeks, and I pulled the scarf up over my chin, the wool soft against my skin. I walked to the hotel lobby, a modest building with a flickering neon sign that read Valley View Lodge, and checked in with the night clerk, a tired woman in her 60s who did not ask questions. I took the keycard, walked to room 107 on the ground floor, and locked the door behind me. The room was generic: a queen bed with a beige bedspread, a desk with a lamp, a television mounted on the wall, a small bathroom with a single sink. I set my bag on the desk chair, pulled out my laptop, and opened a secure folder I had encrypted with a passphrase my grandfather had taught me: THETRUTHISANINVISIBLEA4TRSS. I had been building this folder for 3 years, adding documents, scanned receipts, email threads, and written notes. It contained every piece of evidence I had gathered, organized by date, cross-referenced by category, labeled with the precision of a forensic accountant who knew that the smallest detail could break a case open. I scrolled through the entries. There was the recorded trust deed, scanned and timestamped. There was the purchase agreement with TerraCore Energy, LLC, a subsidiary of a multinational rare earth extraction corporation, signed and notarized on October 12th of this year. There was the certified check for $2,300,000, issued by a regional bank, drawn on an escrow account, deposited into a trust I had established under my name. There were the bank statements from the family farm's joint account, showing the payments I had made: $43,000 for the first tax lien, $12,000 for the equipment loan, $6,000 for the new roof on the farmhouse, which I had paid for out of pocket after my uncle had let it leak for 3 years. There were the email threads, the text messages, the voicemail transcriptions, every interaction I had cataloged, every slight I had logged, every moment of dismissal I had turned into data. And then there was the smoking gun, the document I had received in the mudroom mail slot on that cold November evening. I opened the scanned copy, zoomed in on the signature line. The promissory note from First Hudson Valley Bank, dated March 12th of this year, listing Cole Vance as borrower and the back 40 as collateral. The signature read Harold Vance, my grandfather's name, but the handwriting was wrong. The loop of the H was too tight, the V too sharp, the tail of the E not quite reaching the top. I had compared it to my grandfather's signature on the trust deed, which I had watched him sign in my presence. The differences were subtle but undeniable. The notary stamp was from a company called National Document Services, a name I had never heard of. I had looked them up. Their registration had expired 2 years before this document was notarized. The notary commission number on the stamp was 6 digits, but New York State notary numbers were 8 digits. A simple, obvious fraud, but only to someone who knew where to look. I closed the file and sat back in the chair, my eyes fixed on the blank wall across the room. The clock on the nightstand read 7:43. Jonathan would be here soon. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 7:58, there was a knock on the door, 3 short, even raps. I stood, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. Jonathan Hart stood in the hallway, a man in his late 40s with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a gray overcoat that fell to his knees. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick manila envelope in the other. I opened the door. "Elena," he said. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had seen every kind of financial deception and had never lost his composure. "Jonathan, thank you for coming." He nodded, stepped inside, and set the briefcase on the desk. I closed the door and locked it. He unlatched the briefcase, pulled out the manila envelope, and placed it on the desk in front of me. "Everything is here," he said. "The original trust deed, as recorded, the purchase agreement with TerraCore Energy, the certified check deposited into the trust account you established, the court order freezing all joint accounts associated with the Vance family farm pending a full forensic audit, and the sealed letter from your grandfather, which I was instructed to deliver to you personally." I reached for the envelope, my fingers brushing the thick paper. The flap was sealed with a wax imprint, a simple circle with no symbol, just a smooth red dome. I broke the seal carefully, pulled out the contents, and spread them across the desk. The first document was the trust deed, a heavy legal sheet with the county clerk's stamp in blue ink. I scanned it quickly, verifying the date, June 14, 2019, the parcel number, the signatures. It was exactly as I remembered. The second document was the purchase agreement, bound with a blue cover sheet, signed by the TerraCore representative and me. The total consideration was listed in bold, $2,300,000, $2,300,000. The mineral rights were described in precise legal language, referencing the rare earth deposit that had been discovered by a geological survey 2 years ago, a deposit that the family had dismissed as fool's gold when I had mentioned it at a dinner. The third document was a certified check, drawn on the trust account at First Hudson Valley Bank, payable to the Vance Family Estate Trust in the amount of $2,300,000. I touched the edge of the check, the paper crisp and official, and I felt the weight of what it represented. Not just money, but leverage. A tool. A mirror. The fourth document was the court order, signed by a judge in the county probate court, freezing all assets of any joint accounts or trusts associated with the Vance family farm, including any accounts held by Cole Vance, Simone Vance, Derek Vance, or any other named beneficiaries, pending a full audit of the estate's financial records. The order cited reasonable cause to believe that fraudulent transfers have occurred and named Jonathan Hart as the independent auditor. And then there was the envelope that contained the sealed letter. I slid it out carefully, a single sheet of cream-colored paper, folded in thirds. The handwriting was unmistakable, my grandfather's looping script, the same hand that had written in the ledgers I had found in his study. The ink was slightly faded, the paper yellowed at the edges, but the words were clear. "Elena, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have done what I asked. I know you carried this burden alone. I know you paid debts that no one else knew about. I know you worked in silence while they took credit for the work you did. You were always the one who saw what others missed. That is why I gave you the back 40. That is why I filed the trust deed. That is why I asked Jonathan to hold this letter until the moment you were ready. Do not let them take what is yours. Use the truth, not anger. And when the time comes, remember, the land is not the gift. The freedom is the gift. I am proud of you. Grandpa." I read the letter 3 times. The first time, I registered the words. The second time, I felt the weight behind them. The third time, I let the tears come, not in a rush, not in a sob, but in a quiet, steady release that I did not try to stop. I sat at the desk, the letter in my hands, the mustard scarf warm around my neck, and I let myself grieve for the man who had seen me when no one else did. Jonathan did not speak. He simply stood by the door, his hands clasped behind his back, waiting. After a long moment, I folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope, and tucked it into the inner pocket of my coat, next to my heart. I looked at the documents spread across the desk, the check, the court order, the trust deed, the purchase agreement. I looked at the clock, 8:12. "We move tomorrow morning," I said. 7:30, I will serve the court order myself." Jonathan nodded. "I will be at the courthouse at 8 to file the audit report." Lydia will have the original trust deed and purchase agreement ready for verification. Good. He hesitated, then said, Elena, they are going to try to contact you tonight. Cole has already left 3 voicemails on my office line. He is panicking. I felt a thin, cold smile curve across my lips. Let him panic. Let him call. Let him leave messages. Every word he speaks is evidence. Jonathan left at 8:24, and I locked the door behind him. I stood alone in the hotel room, the documents arranged on the desk like a chessboard, the check gleaming under the lamp. I pulled out my phone and saw that I had missed 4 calls from Cole, 2 from Simone, and 1 from Derek. There were 3 text messages, all from Cole. We need to talk. Call me. I know you think you have something, but you don't. Elena. Please, I read them, felt the satisfaction of asymmetry, the knowledge that I knew everything and they knew almost nothing, and then I deleted them without responding. I would not give them the satisfaction of a reply. I would not give them the chance to negotiate, to manipulate, to weasel their way into a better deal. The trap was set, and they were walking into it with their eyes wide open, blinded by their own arrogance. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the desk and reviewed every piece of evidence in my secure folder, cross-referencing dates, amounts, signatures. I traced the loan Cole had taken out against the Back 40, $2,300,000, wired to an account he had opened under a shell company he called Vance Family Holdings, LLC. I found the LLC registration, filed 6 months before the loan, with Cole listed as the sole member. The business address was a P.O. box in Albany. The purpose of the LLC, according to the filing, was real estate investment. I found the bank statements for that account, obtained through a subpoena that Jonathan had secured as part of the preliminary audit. The money had been transferred out within 72 hours of the loan being issued, $1,200,000 to a brokerage account in Cole's name, $800,000 to a car dealership that sold luxury vehicles, $300,000 to a credit card company that Simone had used to pay off personal debts. None of the money had gone to the farm. None of the money had been used for repairs, equipment, or operational expenses. It had been stolen, plain and simple, and the paper trail was undeniable. I also found something else: a series of email exchanges between Cole and a lawyer named Marcus Webb, a disbarred attorney who had been convicted of fraud in 2 separate cases. Cole had hired Webb to draft the forged power of attorney, paying him $10,000 in cash. The emails were dated 6 weeks before the loan application. I printed out every page, organized them in chronological order, and placed them in a 3-ring binder with dividers labeled forgery, fraudulent transfer, bank records, and communications. When I was done, I had a binder that was 2 inches thick, containing everything I needed to destroy them. And yet, I did not feel triumphant. I felt a strange, hollow stillness, the kind that settles over you when you realize that the victory you have been building is not about money or land or revenge, but about the simple, undeniable truth that you were right all along. I looked at the clock, 3:17 in the morning. Outside, the sky was still dark, the parking lot empty, the world holding its breath. I pulled out my phone and opened the message thread with Lydia. I typed a single sentence: I am ready. She replied 3 minutes later, so are we. At 6:45, I showered, dressed in a dark blazer and slacks, and wrapped my grandfather's scarf around my neck. I checked the mirror. My face was composed, my eyes clear, my posture straight. I looked like a woman who was walking into a boardroom, not a courtroom, but the effect was the same. I gathered the binder, the manila envelope with the court order and the certified check, and I walked out to my car. The sky was pale gray, the sun just beginning to lighten the horizon. The air was cold and crisp, and I breathed it in deeply, feeling the sharpness in my lungs. I drove to the farmhouse, the gravel road winding through the frozen fields, the barn visible in the distance. I parked in the driveway, behind Cole's truck and Simone's SUV, and I walked to the barn door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open, and the scent of hay and cold wood and old dust washed over me. They were already there. Cole stood at the long table, his back to me, his phone pressed to his ear. Simone sat in a chair near the window, her arms crossed, her face tight. Derek was pacing near the far wall, his hands shoved into his pockets. When I walked in, Cole turned, his face registering surprise, then anger, then a flicker of something that might have been fear. "Elena," he said, ending his call. "You came." "I said I would." Simone stood up. "We have been waiting. We have been trying to call you." "I noticed." Cole stepped forward, his hands spread in a gesture that was supposed to look conciliatory. "Look." We talked all night. And we think maybe we can work something out. We are willing to let you keep the mineral rights. We are willing to let you keep the sale proceeds. We just want to keep the land and the family. We want to avoid a legal fight. I did not respond. I simply stood there, the manila envelope in my hand, the binder tucked under my arm, and I let him talk. We know you have the trust deed, he continued. We know it is legal. But we also know that filing that deed without telling the rest of the family was a breach of trust. We could argue that you coerced Grandpa. We could argue that you took advantage of his age and his health. We do not want to do that. We want to resolve this amicably. Simone nodded. We are willing to give you $200,000, Alina. In exchange for you signing over the mineral rights and agreeing to dissolve the trust. You walk away with $200,000, we keep the land, and nobody goes to court. I looked at them. I looked at their rehearsed faces, their calculated offers, their desperate attempts to salvage what they thought was theirs. I felt a wave of something, not anger, not sadness, but a cold, clinical understanding. They still did not know about the loan. They still did not know about the forged power of attorney. They still did not know that I had already won. I set the manila envelope on the table, unsealed it, and pulled out the court order. This is a court order, I said, issued by Judge Miriam Kessler of the 3rd Judicial District, freezing all assets of any joint accounts or trusts associated with the Vance family farm, effective as of 8 o'clock this morning. It also names Jonathan Hart as the independent auditor of the estate, with full access to all financial records, including the account held by Vance Family Holdings, LLC. Cole's face went white. Simone's hand flew to her mouth. Derek stopped pacing. You do not understand what you are doing, Cole said, his voice cracking. I understand perfectly, I said, and I pulled out the second document, a copy of the promissory note. I also understand that you took out a $2,300,000 loan against property you did not own, using a forged power of attorney for personal expenses. That is fraud, Cole. That is a crime. Simone let out a small, strangled sound. Derek stared at the floor. Cole opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. I tucked the documents back into the envelope and turned toward the door. Your lawyer will be in contact. The audit will take approximately 6 weeks. At that point, we will determine how much of the estate's assets remain after the debts and fraudulent transfers are accounted for. Any questions can be directed to Jonathan Hart. I walked out of the barn, the cold air hitting my face, the sky now fully light, the sun a pale disk in the gray expanse. Behind me, I heard Simone's voice, sharp and accusing. You told me you had it under control, Cole. You told me we were safe. And then the door swung shut, and I did not hear the rest. They had no idea that the 5,000 pages of evidence were already bound in 3 matching manila envelopes, each stamped with the county seal, waiting for the moment I walked into the courthouse. I arrived at the county courthouse at 7:58 on a Tuesday morning, the sky a pale, wounded gray, the air thick with the promise of snow. The building was a squat, limestone structure from the 19th century, its steps worn smooth by generations of feet seeking justice or mercy or simply the weight of a final answer. I parked in the lot across the street, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and adjusted my grandfather's scarf so that it lay flat against the collar of my coat. I had not eaten. I had not slept. I felt a clarity that was sharper than exhaustion, a cold, focused precision that had been building for 7 years and was now ready to discharge. The binder was in my leather satchel, the manila envelope with the court order was in my hand, and the certified check was in the inner pocket of my coat, next to the sealed letter. I had not told anyone I was coming. I had not given the family a warning. The hearing was a routine probate matter, scheduled weeks ago, a review of the estate's preliminary accounting. The family assumed I would not attend. They assumed I had already folded. I climbed the steps, pushed open the heavy wooden door, and walked into the cavernous lobby. The floor was blackened white marble, polished to a dull gleam, and the air smelled of old paper and floor wax. A security guard nodded as I passed through the metal detector, and I made my way to the probate courtroom on the 2nd floor, room 207. The door was open. I stepped inside. The courtroom was small, paneled in dark oak, with a raised bench for the judge and 2 long tables for the parties. A clerk sat at a desk near the bench, typing. The judge had not yet entered, but the family was already there. Cole sat at one of the long tables, his hands clasped in front of him, his face a mask of controlled confidence. Simone sat beside him, a hands-free earpiece in her left ear. She had been on the phone all morning, no doubt coordinating damage control with their lawyer. Derek was in the back row, his head down, a coffee cup balanced on his knee. Their lawyer was a man I recognized, Frank Hollister, a silver-haired attorney from a regional firm that specialized in estate litigation. He was known for his aggressive cross-examinations and his ability to muddy the waters. He was also known for a recent 3-month suspension for failing to disclose a conflict of interest. I had researched him thoroughly. When I walked in, the room went still. Cole's head snapped up, his jaw tightening. Simone's eyes widened, and she touched her hair, the micro-gesture I had catalogued years ago. Derek looked at me and then looked away. "Elena," Cole said, his voice flat, "I did not expect to see you here." "I own the estate's largest asset," I said, taking a seat at the opposite table. "Where else would I be?" Frank Hollister stood and approached me, his smile practiced and empty. "Miss Vance, this is a preliminary hearing. I am not sure your presence is necessary. We have the estate's financial records ready for review." "I am sure you do," I said, "but I have my own records, and I believe the judge will want to see them." He studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing, and then he returned to his seat. Cole leaned over and whispered something to him. Frank shook his head slightly. The bailiff entered and announced, "All rise, the Honorable Miriam Kessler presiding." We stood. Judge Kessler entered, a woman in her late 50s with sharp gray eyes and a no-nonsense posture. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked over the case file. "This is the matter of the estate of Harold Vance, case number 2097. We are here for a preliminary status conference. Counsel, please identify yourselves." Frank Hollister stood first, introducing himself and his representation of the family. Then I stood, alone, and said, "Elena Vance, appearing pro se." Judge Kessler raised an eyebrow. "You are representing yourself, Miss Vance?" "Yes, Your Honor. I am a certified public accountant and a forensic auditor. I have prepared the estate's financial records myself." Cole let out a short, derisive laugh. "She cannot even afford a bus ticket, Your Honor." "She has no standing to, Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice sharp. "You will speak when I recognize you." Simone put a hand on Cole's arm, and he fell silent, his face reddening. Judge Kessler turned to me. "Miss Vance, you have submitted an inventory of the estate's assets?" "I have, Your Honor, but I also have additional evidence that has come to light since the inventory was filed. I request permission to enter it into the record." Frank Hollister stood. "Your Honor, we object. We have not been shown this evidence. This is a preliminary hearing, not a trial." "I am aware of the nature of the hearing, Mr. Hollister." She looked at me. "What is the nature of this evidence, Miss Vance?" I opened my satchel and pulled out the manila envelope. It includes a recorded trust deed, executed by Harold Vance on June 14, 2019, transferring ownership of a parcel known as the Back 40 to me, Elena Vance, as sole beneficiary. It includes a purchase agreement for the mineral rights of that parcel, executed with TerraCore Energy LLC, for the sum of $2,300,000. It includes a certified check for that amount, deposited into a trust account I established in the name of the estate. And it includes a court order from this court, issued last week, freezing all assets of any joint accounts or trusts associated with the Vance family farm, pending a full forensic audit. The room was silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. "Your Honor, that court order has not been served on us," Frank said, his voice tight. "It is being served right now," I said. I pulled out the original order and placed it on the table. "I have a copy here." "The original is filed with the clerk." Judge Kessler studied the order. She looked up. "This was signed by me on the 15th of this month. It is valid and enforceable." Cole stood up. "This is a farce. She tricked Grandpa. She manipulated him. He was old, he was sick, he did not know what he was signing." "The trust deed was witnessed by 2 independent witnesses," I said calmly. "One of them was his primary care physician, Dr. Susan Park. The other was his longtime attorney, Robert Chen, who is now deceased. Both signatures have been verified." Simone's earpiece crackled, and she pressed a hand to it, her face growing pale. She whispered something to Cole, but he shook her off. "Your Honor," Frank said, "we need time to review these documents. This is highly irregular." "You will have time," the judge said, "but the court order stands. Miss Vance, do you have any other evidence?" I reached into my satchel again and pulled out the binder. "I have a complete financial audit of the estate and its related entities, including an account held by Vance Family Holdings, LLC. This account received a wire transfer of $2,300,000 from First Hudson Valley Bank on March 15th of this year. The funds were disbursed within 72 hours, $1,200,000 to a brokerage account in the name of Cole Vance, $800,000 to a luxury car dealership, $300,000 to a credit card company used jointly by Cole and Simone Vance. The loan was secured by a forged power of attorney, using the back 40 as collateral, property that Cole did not own, as the trust deed had already transferred it to me. Cole's face had gone from red to white. He was breathing heavily, his hands trembling. That is not, you cannot prove that. I have the forgery expert's report, I said. I have the notary records showing that the notary commission number on the loan document was expired. I have the email correspondence between you and Marcus Webb, the disbarred attorney who drafted the forged power of attorney. It is all here, organized and dated. I slid the binder across the table toward the judge. Frank Hollister stood frozen, his mouth open. Judge Kessler opened the binder, scanned the first few pages, and then closed it. She looked at Cole. Mr. Vance, you are under investigation for fraud, forgery, and attempted misappropriation of estate assets. I am ordering the immediate transfer of all remaining assets in the Vance Family Holdings account to the estate trust. I am also issuing a bench warrant for the arrest of Marcus Webb, if he can be located. And I am scheduling a full evidentiary hearing in 60 days. Until then, you are prohibited from accessing any estate or joint accounts. Is that clear? Cole did not answer. He was staring at the binder, his jaw slack, his eyes unfocused. Simone stood up, her earpiece dangling. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of this. I did not know about the loan. I did not know about the forgery. That will be determined at the hearing, Mrs. Vance. Derek had risen from his seat and was moving toward the door, his phone in his hand. I did not watch him leave. Judge Kessler turned to me. Miss Vance, the court recognizes the validity of the trust deed and the purchase agreement. The certified check will be held in the estate trust pending the outcome of the hearing. But I want to commend you for your thoroughness and your willingness to bring this matter to light. Thank you, Your Honor. I gathered my documents, placed them back in my satchel, and walked out of the courtroom. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could hear Cole's voice, rising in panic, and Simone's cold, sharp replies and Frank Hollister's attempts to calm them. The fracture had become a chasm. 5 days later, I returned to the farmhouse for the last time. I had received a call from the county sheriff's office. The property had been secured, and I was permitted to retrieve my grandfather's personal effects from the study. I drove out on a gray Thursday afternoon, the fields covered in a thin crust of snow, the barn doors closed and padlocked. The house was dark. The power had been shut off. I walked through the mudroom, my footsteps echoing on the bare floorboards, and I entered the study. The room was exactly as I had left it. The desk, the chair, the reading glasses, the ledgers. I stood for a long moment, letting the silence settle around me. I sat in his chair. I opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside, there was a photograph, my grandfather and me, standing in the back 40 the summer before he died. I was holding a folder and he was pointing at the horizon. We were both smiling. I took the photograph and I took a single ledger, the one he had been writing in when he died. I left everything else. I locked the study door behind me, walked out of the farmhouse, and did not look back. The epilogue is a clean time jump, 18 months. I am sitting in my office on the 32nd floor of a high-rise building in Albany, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The furniture is minimalist, a glass desk, a leather chair, a single framed photograph on the wall. The photograph is of my grandfather, standing in the back 40, his hand on my shoulder. And on the back of my chair, draped over the leather like a flag of surrender, is my grandfather's mustard scarf. I do not wear it anymore. I do not need to. It hangs there, a reminder of the cold barn where I claimed my power, and the woman who walked out of it with nothing but the truth. The estate hearing concluded 7 months ago. Cole was found guilty of fraud and forgery. He is serving a sentence of 3 to 5 years in a state correctional facility. Simone divorced him 6 weeks after the hearing. She lost the house, the car, the jewelry, all of it was seized to repay the debts she had helped accumulate. She is living with her sister in New Mexico, and she has not contacted me. Derek moved to Florida and started a landscaping business. He sent me a text message once, 2 words, "Thank you." I deleted it. I kept the back 40. I kept the mineral rights. The rare earth deposit beneath that soil is now being extracted by TerraCore Energy, and the royalty payments alone are enough to fund a scholarship in my grandfather's name at the local community college. I have given away more than half of the $2.3 million to land trusts, to legal aid clinics, to a foundation that helps elderly farmers protect their property from predatory lending. I do not need the money. I needed the leverage. And now I sit here in this glass tower and I think about the 5 hard truths I learned in that barn. The first truth is, the family you protect will never protect you. I spent 7 years paying off debts that Cole had never acknowledged, fixing problems he had created, covering for a legacy he had never earned. I did it because I believed that loyalty was seen, that sacrifice was remembered. But loyalty is not currency in a narcissistic system. It is a resource to be consumed. The moment I stopped paying, they turned on me, not because I had changed, but because I had finally made visible the line they had been crossing for years. The second truth is, a legal trust is an invisible fortress. My grandfather understood that the law could protect what love could not. He filed that trust deed in secret, recorded it with the county, made it ironclad. He knew that Cole would try to take what was not his. He knew that the only way to stop him was with a piece of paper that carried more weight than any promise. I have seen it 100 times in my work, the difference between those who prepare and those who assume. The trust deed was not a weapon. It was a door that I could lock. The third truth is, greed leaves a paper trail. Cole thought he was clever. He used a shell company, a forged signature, a disbarred lawyer. But every transaction leaves a mark, and every mark can be traced. The bank statements, the wire transfers, the emails, they were all there, waiting for someone who knew how to look. Greed is not quiet. It is a scream that echoes in ledgers. The fourth truth is, silence is not weakness, it is strategic. For 7 years, I said nothing. I let them mock me, dismiss me, underestimate me. I collected their words like data points. I watched their faces, their hands, their micro-expressions. I built a case file from their own arrogance, and when I finally spoke, I did not shout. I did not argue. I simply handed the judge a binder. Silence is the most underrated weapon because it allows the opponent to reveal themselves entirely. And the fifth truth is, the moment you stop paying for their mistakes, they pay. For years, I absorbed the costs of their dysfunction, the tax liens, the equipment loan, the emotional weight of being the invisible fixer. The moment I withdrew, the structure collapsed under its own weight. Cole's loan, his lies, his fraud, none of it was new. It had always been there. I had just been the one who kept it hidden. When I let the light in, the rot was visible to everyone. I have learned these truths not to use as weapons, but to use as boundaries. I keep them close, like the scarf that no longer hangs around my neck but stays within sight, a reminder that the only person who will protect you is the one who has prepared for the fight before the fight comes. If this story has resonated with you, if you have ever been the invisible fixer, the one who holds the family together while they take you for granted, I ask you to do something. Look at your own boundaries. Ask yourself who you are protecting. Ask yourself whether they would protect you in return. And if the answer is no, start building your fortress. It does not have to be a trust deed. It can be a savings account, a security deposit box, a written agreement, a single conversation where you say, no more. The material of the fortress matters less than the act of building it. If you found value in this story, please share it with someone who needs to hear that silence is not weakness. Leave a comment. Let me know where you are listening from. And above all, take the lesson of the scarf. Wear it when you need to, but hang it up when you no longer have to. Keep your boundaries strong. Guard your peace, and I will see you in the next.